My name is Elena Carter. I'm 28 years old, and on the day I was supposed to become someone's wife, I realized I had been slowly disappearing for 2 years. Not in a dramatic way. Not the kind people notice right away. It was quieter than that. It started with small things. A comment here, a look there, a suggestion framed as help. And by the time I stood in front of the mirror in my wedding dress, I couldn't tell where I ended and where their expectations began. But the moment everything broke, the exact second I saw the truth clearly, wasn't during the vows. It wasn't even during the ceremony. It was 10 minutes before I walked down the aisle when I found my mother sitting alone in a hallway. No seat, no place card, no role, just waiting. And what I did after that, what he said, and what happened in front of 180 guests, that's the story I'm about to tell. But before I do, take a second, because this isn't just about a wedding. It's about the moment you realize you've been choosing someone who would never choose you back. Now let me take you to the beginning. I grew up in a town called Briarwood. Population, barely 6,000. The kind of place where everyone knows your name, and your business, and your parents' business too. My mom, Diane Carter, worked at the local bakery. She woke up at 4 a.m. every day to make bread that sold out before noon. My dad passed away when I was 14, heart attack, no warning, no goodbye, just one phone call that split my life into before and after. After that, it was just me and my mom, and she never let me feel like we were missing anything. Not once. We didn't have money. Sure, my prom dress was altered from a thrift store find. My college was paid through scholarships and 2 part-time jobs. But we had something else. Stability, respect, and a kind of quiet dignity that doesn't need to prove itself. I thought that was enough, until I met Daniel Reeves. I met Daniel at a fundraising event in the city. I wasn't even supposed to be there. A doctor from the clinic I worked at gave me his extra ticket. Go, he said. You need to see something bigger than Briarwood. He wasn't wrong. That night was different. Crystal glasses, soft music, people who spoke like every sentence had been practiced. And Daniel fit into that world effortlessly. Tall, confident, polished. The kind of man who didn't just walk into a room, he belonged there. He noticed me almost immediately. Later, he told me it was because I looked real. At the time, I thought that was a compliment. Now I understand it was the beginning of a problem. Our first date was simple. Coffee. Second date, dinner. Third, he introduced me to his world. And that's when things started to shift. His family wasn't just wealthy. They were established, old money. His father owned multiple commercial properties. His mother chaired charity boards and hosted events where people wore silk like it was casual. Their house had rooms no one used, just space. The first time I walked in, I felt it immediately. That subtle pause people make when they're assessing you. Not openly judging, just categorizing. Daniel squeezed my hand. They'll love you, he said. I wanted to believe him. His mother, Victoria Reeves, greeted me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Elena, she said slowly, what a lovely name. Then she looked at my dress, then my shoes, then back at my face. And what do you do? I'm a nurse, I said. Oh, she replied. Just oh, nothing more. That one word told me everything. I ignored it, because Daniel was kind, attentive. He brought me lunch at work. He remembered small details. He made me feel chosen. And when you feel chosen, you overlook things. You explain them away. She's just protective, he'd say. She'll warm up. She didn't. But by the time I accepted that, I was already in love. The proposal happened a year later. Perfect setting, perfect ring, perfect timing. Everything looked right, and I said yes. Because I believe the same thing most people do. That once you're married, it becomes you and them against the world, not you against their world. Wedding planning started immediately, and that's when I began losing ground. Slowly, quietly, piece by piece. The venue, his mother chose it. The guest list, adjusted. The menu, refined. Every time I tried to push back, Daniel would say, let her have this. It's just the wedding. Just the wedding. That phrase became a pattern. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I wasn't compromising. I was surrendering. The only thing I insisted on was one detail. My mother. She sits in the front, I told him, next to your parents. He smiled. Of course. No hesitation, no argument. And that's why what happened next hit so hard. Wedding day. 9:30 a.m. I arrived at the venue early, hair done, makeup set, dress hanging like a promise I wasn't sure I could keep. Everything looked perfect, exactly like the kind of wedding people dream about. But perfection has a cost. And I was about to find out what mine was. I was walking toward the bridal suite when I saw her. My mom, sitting alone in a hallway. No one with her, no direction, no place, just waiting, like she wasn't part of it. "Mom," I said. She looked up quickly, forcing a smile. "Oh, honey, you look beautiful. Why are you here?" I think there was some confusion with seating. Something in my chest tightened. "What do you mean?" She hesitated. "They said I should wait here until someone comes." No one had come. And in that moment, before I even checked the seating chart, before I spoke to Daniel, before anything was confirmed, I already knew this wasn't a mistake. And I was right. I didn't run. I didn't panic. And I didn't make a scene in that hallway, even though something inside me had already begun to fracture in a way that felt permanent. Because I had spent years training myself to stay composed in situations that demanded control. And this, whether I wanted to admit it or not, felt exactly like one of those moments where losing control would cost me more than holding it together. So instead, I reached for the one thing that always gave me clarity when everything else blurred. And I started looking for facts, for something concrete. Something that could either confirm what I feared or prove that I was overreacting. Because hope, even when it's fragile, is hard to let go of all at once. The seating chart was displayed near the entrance to the reception hall, mounted on a large white board with gold lettering and carefully arranged place cards. The kind of presentation that looks effortless, but is actually the result of hours of precise planning. And I walked toward it slowly, aware of every step, aware of the sound of my heels against the polished floor, aware of the quiet hum of staff moving in the background, preparing for an event that was supposed to celebrate something pure, something joyful, something that now felt like it was slipping further away with every second. And when I reached the board, I didn't look at the whole thing at once. I focused on one detail, one expectation I had carried without question from the moment we started planning this wedding. Front table. Immediate family. That was the standard, the unspoken rule. The one thing that didn't need negotiation or discussion because it wasn't optional. It was fundamental. And I traced the names at the top slowly, reading each one as if I might have misunderstood, as if I might have missed something, as if there might still be a version of this moment where everything made sense, but the names were exactly where they were meant to be, just not the ones that should have been there. Because instead of seeing my mother's name next to Daniel's parents, I saw a list of people I barely knew, business partners, extended relatives, names that belonged to his world but had nothing to do with mine. And I felt something cold settle into my chest as I kept scanning, moving down the chart, table by table, until I found it. Table 16. Last row. Near the service court. Diane Carter, single seat. I didn't react immediately. Not outwardly, because shock doesn't always look like emotion. Sometimes it looks like stillness. Like the kind of quiet that happens when your mind is trying to catch up to something your body has already understood. And in that moment, I saw it clearly. Not just the table assignment, not just the logistics of where someone would sit for dinner, but the pattern, the accumulation of every small decision that had led to this exact point. Every, "it's not a big deal." Every, "just let it go." Every time I had chosen peace over confrontation. And suddenly all of those choices didn't feel reasonable anymore. They felt like steps, deliberate steps that had brought me here. I turned away from the board and went to find Daniel. Not because I needed confirmation, but because I needed to see his face when I asked the question. I needed to know whether this was something he had allowed or something he had missed. Because there is a difference, a significant one, between ignorance and agreement. And I needed to know which one I was dealing with before I decided what to do next. And I found him in one of the side rooms with his groomsmen, laughing, relaxed, completely at ease in a way that felt almost surreal given what I had just seen. And for a moment I stood there watching him, noticing how natural he looked, how comfortable, how untouched by any of this, and I realized something that I hadn't fully allowed myself to see before. He wasn't surprised. He wasn't stressed. He wasn't trying to fix anything. because for him, nothing was wrong. "Daniel," I said, and my voice came out steady, controlled, the way it does when I'm about to deliver news to a patient's family, the kind of tone that doesn't invite avoidance, the kind that demands attention. He turned, smiled, took a step toward me as if this was just another moment in a perfect day, and for a second I almost believed it again, almost let myself slip back into the version of reality where everything was fine. But then I remembered the hallway, my mother sitting alone, the empty space beside her, and the illusion broke just as quickly as it had formed. "What's wrong?" he asked, still smiling, still calm. "Why is my mother at table 16? The smile didn't disappear immediately, but it changed, just slightly, enough that I could see the shift, the calculation, the moment where he chose how to respond instead of reacting instinctively. And that was the first answer I got, not from his words, but from that pause. "It's just seating logistics," he said, as if the explanation was obvious, as if I should already understand, as if I was the one complicating something simple. "She's alone," I said. "We had to make adjustments," he replied, and now there was a hint of impatience beneath the calm, subtle but unmistakable. "She's your future mother-in-law," I said, holding his gaze, not raising my voice, not needing to, because the weight of that sentence didn't require volume. He exhaled, ran a hand through his hair, and for the first time I saw something closer to irritation than concern. "Elena, we have a lot going on today. Can we not get into this right now?" That sentence, more than anything else, told me exactly where I stood, because it wasn't just what he said, it was what he didn't say. He didn't deny it, he didn't say he'd fix it, he didn't even ask why it mattered so much. He dismissed it, categorized it as something minor, something inconvenient, something that could be postponed, and in doing that, he made a choice. "When would be a better time?" I asked. "After the ceremony," he said. "We'll figure it out." After. Always after. Later. Tomorrow. At some undefined point where the consequences of inaction no longer mattered. I studied his face for a moment, looking for something, anything that suggested he understood the weight of what he was asking me to ignore. But there was nothing there, no urgency, no discomfort, just the expectation that I would do what I had always done, adjust, accommodate, let it go. And in that moment, I realized that this wasn't new. This wasn't a sudden change. This was consistent, predictable, the natural outcome of a dynamic that had been in place long before this day. "I'm gonna fix it," I said. He shook his head slightly, almost reflexively. "Don't make a scene," he replied. And there it was again. Not concern for me, not concern for my mother, concern for perception, for appearances, for the room full of people whose opinions mattered more than the person who had raised me. I didn't argue. I didn't push. I just nodded once and walked out because I had heard enough, not just in that conversation, but in every conversation that had come before it, and I understood now that whatever I did next, I would be doing it alone. As I walked back toward the hallway where my mother was still waiting, I felt something shift inside me. Not dramatically, not all at once, but steadily, like a line being drawn in a place that had always been blurred. And I knew that whatever happened next would define more than just this day. It would define the rest of my life. Because moments like this don't exist in isolation. They set precedents. They establish patterns. They determine what you will accept and what you will tolerate moving forward. And I was standing at the edge of that decision whether I was ready or not. My mother looked up when she saw me, that same careful smile still in place. The one she used when she didn't want to make things harder for anyone else. The one that said she was already prepared to accept whatever explanation I gave her, even if it didn't make sense, even if it hurt. And that, more than anything, made this harder, because she wasn't going to demand better for herself, which meant it was up to me to decide whether she would get it. "It's okay," she said before I even spoke, as if she could read the tension in my face, as if she was trying to protect me from having to say it out loud. "No," I said quietly, sitting down beside her, taking her hand, feeling how steady it was despite everything. "It's not." And for the first time that day, she didn't argue. She didn't smile. She didn't try to make it easier. She just looked at me, really looked at me. And in that silence, I realized she already knew. Not the details, not the full picture, but enough to understand that this wasn't an accident. and that whatever I was about to do would matter. The music from the ceremony space began to swell in the distance, a signal that everything was about to start, that guests were taking their seats, that the timeline was moving forward exactly as planned. And I sat there for one more moment, holding her hand, feeling the weight of everything pressing in at once. The expectations, the pressure, the reality of what walking away would mean, and the reality of what staying would cost. "Mom," I said, my voice softer now but clearer than it had ever been, "if I don't walk down that aisle, will you be okay?" She didn't answer right away. And I could see the conflict in her eyes, the instinct to tell me to go through with it, to not cause trouble, to not throw everything away, battling with something deeper, something more honest, something that had nothing to do with appearances and everything to do with truth. And when she finally spoke, her voice was steady in a way that made my chest tighten. "I'll be okay," she said, "but I need you to be okay too." That was it. That was the moment. Not the seating chart. Not Daniel's response. Not the hallway. But that sentence. Because suddenly the question wasn't about the wedding anymore. It was about me. And whether I was willing to build a life in a place where the people I loved were treated as optional. I stood up slowly, still holding her hand for a second longer before letting go. And I took a breath, deep enough to steady myself, deep enough to silence the noise in my head. And when I exhaled, the decision was already made. I just hadn't said it out loud yet. And I knew exactly where I was going next. I didn't rush when I left that hallway. I didn't run toward the ceremony like someone trying to stop something before it was too late. Because somewhere between my mother's quiet answer and the sound of the music beginning in the next room, I understood something that changed the pace of everything. Which was that nothing about this moment needed to be rushed, because the decision had already been made. Not out loud, not publicly, but internally. In a place that had finally stopped negotiating with fear and started listening to something much quieter and much more honest. And that kind of clarity doesn't move fast. It moves deliberately, step by step, with a steadiness that feels almost unfamiliar when you've spent so long doubting yourself. The doors to the ceremony hall were already open. Guests seated, conversations fading into polite silence as the music swelled. And I could feel eyes turning toward me as I appeared at the entrance, dressed exactly the way they expected. The perfect image of a bride about to walk into the life everyone assumed was already decided. And for a moment I stood there, not because I was hesitating, but because I was taking in the full weight of what this looked like from the outside. The symmetry, the elegance, the carefully constructed illusion of something flawless. And I realized how easy it would be to step into it, to follow the script, to let the moment carry me forward without resistance, because everything had been designed to make that the easiest option. Daniel was standing at the front, waiting, confident, composed, exactly as he had been all day. And when he saw me, he smiled in that familiar way that used to make me feel chosen. And for a brief second, I felt the pull of that version of reality again. The one where love was simple and everything else was just background noise. But it didn't hold this time. Because now I could see the full picture, not just the version of him he showed me when things were easy, but the version that stayed silent when it mattered. The version that chose comfort over courage. The version that had already decided what I was worth in the hierarchy of his world. The music reached its cue, the signal for me to walk, and instead of stepping forward immediately, I turned my head slightly and looked back down the aisle, past the rows of guests, past the front tables, all the way to the back where my mother had been placed. And even from that distance, I could see her, sitting quietly, hands folded, posture straight, trying to make herself smaller in a room that had already decided she didn't belong at the center. And that image settled something in me permanently, because I understood in that exact moment that if I walked forward now, I wasn't just marrying Daniel. I was agreeing to that dynamic. I was accepting a life where this would happen again and again in different forms, at different tables, in different rooms, and I would be expected to smile through it every time. So, I didn't walk, at least not in the way they expected. Instead, I stepped forward slowly, But not Daniel, not toward the altar, but down the side of the aisle, shifting the entire direction of the moment in a way that took a few seconds for people to fully register. Because it wasn't dramatic at first, it was subtle, just a deviation from the expected path. But subtle changes are often the most powerful, because they force people to pay attention. And one by one, conversations stopped completely, heads turned. The quiet in the room deepened into something heavier, something uncertain. As they realized this wasn't part of the plan, I kept walking, steady, controlled, aware of every step, until I reached the back row, until I was standing next to my mother, and for a second she looked up at me with confusion, like she thought I had come to say something quickly before returning to the front. But when I reached for her hand instead, when I didn't let go, when I turned to face the room instead of the aisle, the confusion shifted into something else. Something that mirrored the realization moving through the guests in slow, undeniable waves. "Mom," I said quietly, but loud enough in the silence that it carried, "you're not sitting here today." There was a pause, a ripple of movement, a collective intake of breath from people who were beginning to understand that something was happening that they hadn't anticipated. And I could feel Daniel's gaze from across the room, sharp now, focused, no longer relaxed, no longer certain. And I knew he was trying to read what I was about to do, trying to anticipate whether this was a moment he could still control, still redirect, still smooth over. I helped my mother stand, gently, without urgency, and then I did the one thing no one in that room expected. Not Daniel, not his family, not even my mother. I walked her to the front. Not quickly, not defiantly, but calmly, deliberately, as if this had always been the plan. As if this was simply correcting something that had been placed wrong, and the room parted in a way that felt almost instinctive, guests shifting slightly in their seats, creating space without being asked, because even without understanding the full story, they could feel the weight of what was happening, the shift in power, the quiet refusal to follow a script that no longer made sense. When we reached the front, I didn't stop at the altar. I didn't position her beside Daniel's parents, because that would have implied equality in a situation where there hadn't been any. Instead, I turned to face the guests fully, still holding her hand. And for the first time that day, I allowed myself to speak without filtering, without softening, without adjusting my words to make anyone else comfortable. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," I said, my voice steady, carrying clearly through the space, not raised, not emotional, but firm in a way that made it impossible to ignore. Because the woman standing next to me is the person who raised me, who supported me, who made it possible for me to stand here today. And she was asked to sit in the back of this room like she didn't belong at the front of my life. Silence followed, complete and immediate, the kind that feels almost physical, like the air itself has shifted, and I could see the reactions forming in real time, confusion, discomfort, recognition, as people connected the dots, as they realized this wasn't just a deviation from the ceremony, it was a statement. I didn't look at Daniel immediately, because this wasn't about him first, it was about something larger, something that had been building long before this day. And when I continued, I chose my words carefully, not to protect anyone, but to make sure there was no room for misinterpretation. "I was told this was about logistics," I said, "about seating, about arrangements, about things that don't really matter in the long run, but what matters is what those choices say." And what this said, very clearly, was that my family was less important, less presentable, less worthy of being seen. Now I looked at him. Directly. And whatever expression he had been holding all day was gone, replaced by something tighter, something less controlled. Because this wasn't a private conversation he could redirect, this was public, undeniable. And there was no way to reframe it without addressing what had already been exposed. "You asked me not to make a scene," I said, and there was no accusation in my tone, just truth. But a scene was already made the moment my mother was moved to the back of this room, and the only difference now is that everyone can see it. I let that settle, let the silence stretch just long enough that it became uncomfortable, just long enough that it forced acknowledgement. And then I took a breath. Not because I was unsure, but because I wanted the next part to be as clear as everything that came before it. I came here today to start a life with someone who would stand beside me, I continued. Not in front of me, not behind me, and not silent when it mattered. And I realize now that standing here and going through with this would mean accepting something I don't believe in. Not just for myself, but for the family that made me who I am. I felt my mother's hand tighten slightly in mine, not pulling me back, not stopping me, just there, steady, present, exactly the way she had always been, and that was all the confirmation I needed. So I'm not going to do that, I said simply. No dramatic pause. No raised voice. Just a statement. Clear. Final. I'm not getting married today. The words landed in the room with a weight that didn't need amplification, because sometimes the simplest sentences carry the most impact. And for a moment, no one moved. No one spoke. As if the entire space needed a second to recalibrate around something that wasn't supposed to happen. Something that broke the expectations so completely that it left no immediate script to follow. Daniel stepped forward then, finally, breaking his stillness, his voice low but urgent. "Elena, don't do this here," he said, reaching for my arm. I stepped back before he could touch me, not dramatically, just enough to create space, enough to make the boundary visible. "There's no other place to do it," I replied. And that was the last thing I said to him. Because there was nothing left to explain. Nothing left to negotiate. Nothing left to fix. I turned away, still holding my mother's hand, and we walked down the aisle together, not as part of a ceremony, not as part of a plan, but as something much more honest, something unplanned and imperfect and real. And this time the room didn't feel like something I was leaving behind. It felt like something I was finally seeing clearly for what it was. We didn't stop. We didn't look back. The doors opened, the noise of the outside world rushed in, and the moment we stepped out, I felt something shift in a way that was impossible to describe fully. Not relief exactly, not joy, but something quieter and more solid. Like the absence of pressure that had been there for so long, I hadn't even noticed its weight until it was gone. Later, people would talk. They would choose sides. They would analyze, judge, speculate. But none of that changed what mattered. Because when I think back to that day now, I don't remember the silence in the room or the expressions on people's faces or even Daniel standing at the front. I remember one thing. My mother sitting alone, and the moment she wasn't anymore. And if I had walked down that aisle and ignored that, if I had chosen comfort over truth, I would have spent years trying to convince myself it didn't matter. But it did. It always did. And walking away didn't ruin my life. It gave it back to me.